Officials deemed responsible for the downing of that Malaysian Airlines jet. And meanwhile, the bodies from the downed airliner making their way across Ukraine before a transfer to the Netherlands. This is the black box from MH17 is bound for England. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're speaking as the European Union ponders its next move targeting Russia, whether Russia should be the one punished for the downing of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over rebel-held eastern Ukraine. With us to talk about it, Senator Joël Garriaud-Maylam of the French Senate's Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee. Also joining us, Nina Berezner of how do you say it in English?
DEST. It's French, English, and Russian, I think. Destination Est.
Destination East.
Yeah.
Which tried a forum for speaking on East-West issues and bridging the gap when it comes to what we were just talking about before the break, which is how the two sides perceive what's going on inside of Ukraine. We're also in the company of Christine Dugouin of the Institute for Perspective Studies and Security in Europe. And joining us from London, David Satter, former Moscow correspondent for the Financial Times. Before the break, Joël Garriaud-Maylam saying that there's a cynical play on the part of Vladimir Putin, saying that he's besieged, but at the same time, he's not really in a siege mentality.
There is another theory going on in Russia, actually, which says that it was the reason why Putin took over Crimea wasn't because he wanted to enlarge the borders of Russia, but was because the Russian economy was going down already. Yes, so he knew that the West would.
But does Putin feel besieged when he says what we heard him say earlier?
I think he certainly. He never planned for it to happen, I'm sure. Putin might be evil, he might be many things, but he's not an idiot. And this is it's a wrong move, and he knows it. So he's going to try to cover it up. And also, I don't know if you had seen the news, but as I was a bit late, I just received an update from BBC saying that the rebels apparently only gave 200 bodies instead of 280 that was supposed to be on the train, which means, I don't know if it's true, but since it's BBC saying it.
David Satter, let me ask you on that point. How does the downing of this plane change the equation in Ukraine?
Well, in terms of the internal struggle, what matters is that the rebels have the ability to down Ukrainian aircraft, and that's the big advantage that the Ukrainians have. And they have troops that are surrounded and need resupply from the air. They've got to cut off the rebels from their sources of supply across the border in Russia. And they're trying to encircle them. But that means that that elements of the Ukrainian army are very exposed, and it's difficult to supply them. And you can do that, but you can do that by air. If the rebels are going to have the capacity to shoot down Ukrainian planes, and they get that capacity from Russia, then it's going to be that much harder to liquidate the resistance.
And do you see Putin backing off at this point with all the blowback regarding the shooting down of this plane?
It's possible he will back down. This is a game without rules. The purpose, have to really understand why Russia has seized Crimea and provoked a civil war in eastern Ukraine. After all, let's face the fact that for 23 years or so since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia did not contest the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's only after the overthrow of Yanukovych in a kind of anti-criminal revolution a popular anti-criminal revolution, that Russia began to behave in such an openly aggressive way toward Ukraine. And I think the reason was because the Ukrainian example is extremely dangerous to the Putin regime. Yanukovych was the same kind of ruler as Putin. He was a thief. It was a kleptocracy. It was a regime based on corruption, and its ultimate guarantee was the passivity of the population. Well, what happened unexpectedly was that the population rose up and threw him out. And that's the specter of something similar happening in Russia is what is motivating Putin now to try to destabilize the new Ukrainian government.
All right, so for you, the problem is squarely in Moscow, as was said on Monday by the U.S. President Barack Obama. Helen on Facebook saying the EU must respond. It's a slippery slope to anarchy and the breakdown of civilization as we know it. That brings us to the issue of sanctions. Christine Dugouin, they're talking about targeted sanctions against individuals, but they could become sectorial, what they call sanctions, against the military cooperation, against the energy sector, come Thursday when the European Commission meets. What do you think of how's the EU handling it?
I think there is different axes of analysis about sanctions. First, if we are in the third stage and sanction on people or on economy, you are going to touch population. And as you said, population is a big point in Russia, as in every country, because
but that's not where we're at right now. Right now we're talking about targeting individuals. How does the EU seem in the eyes of Russia after that foreign ministers meeting this Tuesday?
It's going to be quite difficult because when you are targeting people, you are targeting often oligarchs, and they had big business with Europe, and it's really hard to touch one guy without touching a whole part of economy. And that's why the first sanctions were quite less. And I remember there was a little comics in the Kommersant, which is a Russian paper, and in which you see Mrs. Merkel, and she had just a little pipe, and she was putting just a little water in a big pot and said, "It's just a question of time." And that's the matter. So yes, of course, European Union is talking about, but can we afford to add these sanctions? That's the point.
And could I just add one little thing? Is that I know the strategy is absolutely awful, what happened, but Russia in the EU-Russia relations are bigger than this, because we're going to have to live together in the future. So people should be analyzing what happens afterwards, after we impose the sanctions.
But if you let Vladimir Putin have his way, which was the point that Joël Gaillot-Mellam was making before the break, when it comes to Georgia, when it comes to stopping Georgia's coming into NATO, when it comes to such issues.
I think that this is really international hysteria going on right now, and I don't think it's good. I don't think associating Russian people with terrorists, I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's right. So maybe we should just use diplomatic ways instead.
All right. One person who agrees with you is Awais. She says the EU cannot respond. It lost all its moral credibility by playing the USA's game in Ukraine. Is it the time for stepped-up sanctions, David Satter?
Well, clearly it is, and the policy of graduated sanctions, of ratcheting up sanctions, has demonstrated that it doesn't work. After all, the attack on the Malaysian airliner took place the day after President Obama announced increased, tougher, but still not overwhelming sanctions against Russia. So I think that the point needs to be made all at once, and it needs to be made decisively, because the failure to do so, given the kind of people who are in charge in Russia, the nature of that leadership, will encourage them to new atrocities in the future. They need to understand that the world is capable of reacting to their behavior and reacting in a way which is not to their advantage.
All right, another reaction, this one from the Euromaidan, that's those activists in Ukraine, their French website, saying Russia is not the USSR. They're not able to wage a real Cold War unless they were supported by the BRICS, that is, and that we shouldn't be so afraid of Russia. What do you think?
I totally agree. I agree with what was said earlier as well. We need to work with Russia. We've got lots of things to do with Russia.
But right now is the time for stepped-up sanctions?
Going much further. Regarding the sanctions, it is important to have sanctions, to have that threat of sanctions, but we have to have a diplomatic action. For too long, we haven't discussed with Russia. We have put Russia on the external side.
Right now, after the downing of that plane, is it time for some more sanctions?
I think there should be some more sanctions. They should be targeted on individuals. I mean, when you are in London, I was there last week. I mean, you only hear Russian in many areas of London. You know, all the property market has had such a boom because of the Russians. I mean, what the Ukrainians suggested, and I remember relaying that here on France 24, is that they wanted targeted sanctions on individuals and in visa granting, for example, because that's where it hurts, because we don't want to hurt the population. We would suffer anyway from these sanctions, but you have to be extremely careful in these sanctions. And by the way, you haven't asked me about the Mistral.
I was going to say, that was my next topic.
I was very surprised. I was expecting it.
Let's talk about the Mistral right now. On the cover of London newspaper The Independent this Tuesday, the headline reads, France and Germany accused of going soft on Putin. At issue, it was just mentioned, the case of the planned sale of those two amphibious battleships, those French battleships, Mistrals, 1.1 billion euro deal sealed by former President Nicolas Sarkozy when he was brokering a peace between Russia and Georgia.
We have already unilaterally, as have the US, said that we would not sell further arms to Russia. We believe other European countries should be doing the same thing. Frankly, in this country, it would be unthinkable to fulfill an order like the one outstanding that the French have.
Of course, that's prompted a rapid response from Paris. Quoted on the front page of the Financial Times, an unnamed French official who points at oligarchs who invest in London. If Mr. Cameron wants to sanction Russia, he would do better to sanction Chelsea and support Paris Saint-Germain instead. But seriously, it is a bit awkward, though, to be delivering warships to Russia at this point in time.
I must say it's quite unfortunate. That's obvious. But, you know, remember...
So should the sale be suspended?
If it could be postponed, it would be a good point, and a good idea, because here again we need negotiations, and here we could have some bargaining powers. We could move forward with a concerted diplomatic action, with a negotiation with Putin. Let us say, I'm going to summarize it, but we know you've been acting wrongly. Let's stop it. You've got to recognize the territory of Ukraine, and let's put a stop to this escalate of war. We've got to put a stop to it. And I really do feel that the Mistral, although I seriously feel that we shouldn't default on a contract. When a contract is signed, it should be fulfilled.
Especially when it's 1.1 billion euros.
On top of that, yes. I mean, would the Brits share in the cost of it? I doubt it. You know, we've got so many problems in budgeting or defense efforts in Europe, and we've got to be careful about that. But here again, it could be a bargaining power, and I feel it could help.
Nina Berezner, should the sale be postponed?
I think what should be done is pointing fingers at each other, like David Cameron was just doing, like mentioning Chelsea, etc. I think it should be postponed. I don't think it should be cancelled. I think, like you said, the Senator said, I think there should be diplomatic ways used.
David Satter?
Well, clearly it should be cancelled. I agree with David Cameron that it's unthinkable to go ahead with such a deal under these circumstances, because the Russians have given us a very clear lesson in how these ultra-modern weapons can be misused. No, any country that puts weapons like the Buk system, the Buk anti-aircraft system, into the hands of marginals and terrorists, it certainly cannot be trusted with advanced weaponry and should not be allowed to import it.
Christine Dugoin?
With the Mistral, there is another matter that I want to highlight. When you are talking with Ukrainians, they just don't understand why you are going on with this transaction. I was talking with another searcher in Kiev, and he just asked me, but do you think that France is going to go on? And I said, I think yes, because it's quite difficult, as you said. And in his opinion, and it's not the only one, it's a way to help the explosion of Ukraine. And it's a point that it seems to me quite important, because European Union had to manage with Ukraine in the next future. Which Ukraine? I don't know. The whole Ukraine, part of Ukraine, federal Ukraine, let's see. But we had to build something with them. And it's going to be very difficult to build something with a partner that didn't believe in you.
All right, so there's divisions within the European Union over this. Big divisions.
Yeah.
But do you sense that perhaps the tide is now turning? We heard our Brussels correspondent say today that the mood is completely changed on the part of countries like the UK, like the Netherlands, which were quite reluctant to go far on sanctions before.
Yeah, of course, because I think the international opinion is really shocked by the crash, and it's almost perfectly understandable. But that's why I think we have to really act with a lot of diplomacy, because we don't have to just, always waltz and react instead of acting and thinking. Because, Russia is part of the problem, yes, of course, but it's also a part of the key. So if we just break every diplomatic way, it's going to be more and more difficult. And moreover, each daily violence in Ukraine...
Won't that just be perceived as weakness, though?
Sorry?
Won't that just be perceived as weakness?
By who?
By the Russians.
But the Russians don't care. They just watch propaganda on TV, and they don't care what's going on in Europe. They have no idea about it.
All right, the sense with this standoff, as expressed by the Dutch foreign minister, is that Europe's credibility is now on the line.
This is no longer about economy and trade. It's about security, about the geostrategic position of Europe, and about justice for almost 200 Dutch people who died in a horrible way.
Nina Berezner, do you feel as though there'll be long-term scars for the European Union if it doesn't handle this right?
I think, like it's been mentioned many times, it should be diplomacy. About the Mistrals, I think it should be delayed for a long time if necessary. And as for Russians, the influential circles, I think Putin has proved it many times. They don't care what's happening. They just need to stay in power. They just care about their money. So if we impose some sanctions, it should be on them. And the rest of the population, they watch propaganda on TV. They don't know what's going on. Nobody has explained anything to them. So.
Joël Garriot-Malam, has your opinion changed since the start of this crisis last November? And do you feel as though the European Union could lose a lot of its credibility if it doesn't handle this in the right way?
I'm not so sure. I feel this crash is a separate issue. It was definitely a mistake. If it had been an Ukrainian fighter plane, nobody would have moved. It would have just been 3 words in a paper and nothing more. That was a mistake. I'm very convinced of it. And because it was a mistake, we shouldn't change immediately attitudes, because that would be a loss of credibility. We've got to remain steady. We've got to wait for the result of the examination and the inquiry, but we've got as well to negotiate. We've got to say enough is enough. We cannot accept that anymore. We know you're responsible for it. We are waiting for the proof. If the proof comes, then there will be more sanctions. But I don't think, because of the crash, it should change everything 100%.
David Satter, what do you think will be the long-term effect of all this?
Well, it'll depend a great deal on what the reaction of the West is. If the reaction of the West is strong and appropriate, it will demonstrate to the Russian people, first of all, that the West has some moral standards and that there are limits to what is acceptable in international behavior. That message will be assimilated to a certain extent by the Russian leadership. Of course, it will have an effect. It will, of course, have an effect on the situation on the ground in Ukraine. If nothing is done, or if the measures that are taken are inadequate, then I think we can expect an intensification of the war in Ukraine and a loss of the ability on the part of the West to limit Russian behavior in the future.
Christine Dugouin, we have seen that in the past week, leading up to this, there was an intensive, as the Ukrainian government forces took back certain key points, including the flashpoint city of Slavyansk, that was followed up by increased troop and personnel movement on the separatist side, and that this could go on for a long, long time.
I'm not so sure, because on both sides they have kind of issues that it's quite difficult to go on and on, because on the government side they need money, and this kind of civil war make money entrance quite difficult. So for governments that can't stay in the civil war for many years, it's going to be quite hard. And in the East, population is really tired of civil war. When we are talking with them, they just say, I'm sick of it all. I just don't want, I'm tired. So at a point...
But that's the population in the East, of course. If the decision's coming from Moscow...
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, because if Moscow is sending soldiers, they need some separatists from the East, to cover them. Because in that way you can say, okay, that's not Russian army, that's separatists, that's rebels, that's population that's fighting. But if population stop fighting, you can't hide yourself. So it's going quite difficult. But you was talking about European credibility. Maybe that on a point we had to make peace, to add an obligation of truce, because right now the daily violence allows a psychological gap between population of the East and on the West, and each day increase this gap, and it's going to be really difficult for them to come in a negotiation phase. So we add, maybe our credibility would be on that side. And maybe that we've got a possibility, because as you said, I think it was probably a mistake. And for Russia, it's very disturbing, because they can say that they don't know anything. They can say, oh no, I don't know, I didn't know. So,
well, there was even a presentation at the Russian Defense Ministry Monday showing where they described how there was a Ukrainian fighter jet near the... they didn't say that he shot down the plane, but
it's a kind of game of face saving. But in all events, they also ask for an international inquiry, because it's, in a way, it's a possibility for them to say, okay, we had an international inquiry, we are going in this inquiry, and we got a ceasefire. In that way, maybe everybody can go back his cold blood, because we can't go on civilian war, because civilians are dying each day, and it's really difficult. Dutch people, they are full of pain right now because of the passenger dying, and it's normal. But in the East, people are dying. Mother, father, husband. And there is the same pain in people, because people are dying.
Right, so we're focusing on the air disaster, but there's a lot more civilians that are being killed on a daily basis. I want to thank you, Christine Dugouin, for joining us. I want to thank Nina Berezner, Joël Garriot-Malam. I also want to thank David Satter for joining us today from London. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24.